Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Efforts that will address education are welcomed on this side of the House. However, to make substantial progress on achieving a good standard of education for all children in developing countries, we must address the barrier of child labour. In June 2015, UNICEF found that 13% of children aged 5 to 14 in developing countries are involved in child labour. So can the Minister therefore tell me what progress DFID is making to help developing countries tackle the use of child labour?
Well, he's right to raise this issue of barriers that keep children out of school, and DFID is working on many of them, not least FGM and tackling child marriage. I should also say that many of the children he talks about are actually girls who often do unpaid labour work at home and on family farms.
Fiona Bruce.
Bangladesh is a significant recipient of UK aid. Yet last week, the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission heard grave concerns about the shrinking civil society space there. What can ministers do to help address this?
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that both DFID and Foreign Office officials raise concerns about the space for civil society with governments, including the government of Bangladesh, together actually with other donors. It's an incredibly important area, and indeed NGOs funded by UK aid are also active in negotiating with governments to protect the space for civil society to operate.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Over 150 charities have raised concerns about the supposed anti-lobbying clause attached to new government grants. Does the Minister not recognise that advocacy is an intrinsic duty of charities to raise issues associated with poverty and ill health across the world?
Well, I don't think these changes prevent them from doing that, and often, indeed, these charities are advocating for the very same things that the UK government is in my area of international development. In fact, only yesterday I was at an event at the UN with charities combating child marriage.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senior Palestinian officials have condemned peace-building initiatives between Israelis and Palestinians, with one condemning football matches between Israeli and Palestinian youths as normalisation of the Zionist enemy. What representations has my right honourable friend made to the Palestinian Authority to condemn these moves, and what moves is she making to build peace between Israel and Palestine?
Well, as my right honourable friend set out earlier in parliamentary questions, we deplore incitement on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we monitor allegations of incitement very closely and indeed raise instances with both leaderships.
Mr. Ronnie Campbell.
Has the Minister given, or does she envisage giving, any aid to any country in the European Union?
Well, he'll be aware that we've played our role in supporting refugees who've fled the Syria conflict and now arrive in the European Union. I think it's right that we do that, but he's also right perhaps to allude that we should look to those countries also to provide the support that they can too.
Freya!
Mr. Speaker, AIDS remains the #1 global killer of women of reproductive age. What more can DFID ministers do to ensure this remains a priority for this government?
Well, he's right, and in fact, in 2013 we had stats that showed an adolescent girl gets infected with HIV every 2 minutes. We've very much put the empowerment of girls and women at the heart of our development agenda. We're the second largest funder of HIV prevention, care and treatment, and we've pledged up to £1 billion to the Global Fund.
Margaret Greenwood.
At the weekend, we saw pictures of a newborn Syrian baby being washed with just a bottle of water outside a crowded tent in the Idamini refugee camp in Greece, where more than 14,000 people are trapped as a result of the latest, but with other refugees to claim asylum.
I can assure her that from international development perspective, we are working to support people caught up in those situations, and of course we are playing our role in resettlement through our Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Karen Lumley.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Karen Lumley.
Thank you, Speaker. With unemployment falling by over 60% and over 5,000 new apprenticeships, Redditch is doing well. And I'm holding my third jobs fair in the next few weeks with 25 companies taking part. Would my right and honourable friend agree with me? We've made a good start, but we must not be complacent and through the Midlands engine continue to get good quality jobs into our region.
I very much agree with what my honourable friend said. If we look at the West Midlands and take today's unemployment figures, we can see that the claimant count has come down in the West Midlands since 2010 by 91,000 people. And I'm sure the House would welcome an update on the unemployment figures out today. Employment in our country at a new record high of 31.4 million people. Compared with 2010, there are now 2,370,000 more people in work than when I became Prime Minister, and the claimant count today down 18,000 in the last month. Figures that I'm sure will be welcomed right across the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Prime Minister tell the House how many people will die from respiratory disease as a result of air pollution before this country meets its legal obligations on air quality by 2025?
I don't have those figures to hand, but what I do know is that we need to make progress on air quality, and that is why we have the new regulations on diesel engines, which is helping. That is why we have the steady decarbonisation of our power sector, which will help, and that is why we do have very strong legislation already in terms of making sure we have clean air, particularly in our cities.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, if I could help the Prime Minister, the sad truth is that 500,000 people would die because of this country's failure to comply with international law on air pollution. Perhaps he could answer another question. How much does air pollution cost our economy every year?
Of course it costs our economy billions because people are being injured, and that is why we have the new clean air zones. That is why we're seeing emissions from cars coming down. And if I give him one example, if we deliver in terms of our carbon reduction plan for electricity generation, we're going to see something like an 85% reduction in carbon between 1990 and 2030. That will give us one of the best records, one of the best green records anywhere in the world.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Royal College of Physicians estimates that air pollution costs our economy £20 billion per year. The failure to deal with air pollution is killing people. Only a few days ago, London faced a severe smog warning. His friend, the Mayor of London, has presided over a legal breach of air quality in the capital every day since 2012. So why can't the Prime Minister hurry up action to make us comply with international law and, above all, help the health of the people of this country?
Well, it was the Conservative governments in the 1950s that passed the Clean Air Acts, and I'm sure it will be this Conservative government that takes further action, including the clean air zones that we have, including lower car emissions. And why are we able to do this? Not only because we care about our environment, but we've got an economy strong enough to pay for these improvements, as we're just about to hear.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, we all welcome the Clean Air Act of 1956, but things have moved on a bit since then. The government are now threatened with being taken to court for its failure to comply with international law on air pollution. He is proposing to spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money defending the indefensible. Why not instead invest that money in cleaner air and better air quality for everyone in this country?
Well, we are investing money in clean air in our country. For instance, we are phasing out the use of coal-fired power stations far in advance of what other European countries are doing, blazing a trail in terms of more renewable energy, the clean nuclear energy that we're going to be investing in. All of these things will make a difference. But let me say again, you can only do this if you have a strong economy able to pay for these things.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, if the government and the Prime Minister are so keen on renewable and clean energy, could he explain why, on Monday, the House approved new regulations to allow communities a veto on clean energy projects like Shore Wind? I got a question from Angela from Lancaster. She asked the Prime Minister this. If I was you, I'd listen. Will the Prime Minister offer the same right of veto to her community and communities like her across the country of a veto on fracking?
We have a proper planning system for deciding these things. But if he wants to know what is happening in terms of renewable energy, 99% of the solar panels in this country were installed since I became Prime Minister. That is the green record we have. The United Kingdom now has the second largest ultra-low emission vehicle market anywhere in the European Union. We've seen one of the strongest growths in renewable energy. But isn't it remarkable? 5 questions in and no welcome for the fall in unemployment. No mention of the 31 million people now in work. No mention of the fact that we've got more women in work, more young people in work, that more people are bringing home a salary, bringing home a wage and paying less taxes. Not a word from the party that I thought was meant to be the party of Labour. That's the truth. The party of working people, getting people into work, is on this side of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the questions to the Prime Minister are these. He once boasted that he led the greenest government ever. No husky was safe from his cuddles. But so could he explain why the Energy and Climate Change Select Committee has produced a damning report when it comes to green energy, saying that major investors describe his policies as risky as a result of cuts and changes? Why is this government so failing the renewable energy sector, clean air, investors, consumers and those that work in that industry?
I think if any proper look at the figures will find that this government has a remarkable record in green energy. Let me take the Climate Action Network. The Climate Action Network, they said that Britain is the second best country in the world for tackling climate change after Denmark. That is our record. Since 2010, we've reduced greenhouse gases by 14%. We're over-delivering against all of our carbon budgets. We secured the first truly global, legally binding agreement to tackle climate change. And we've got annual support for renewables, more than doubling to over £10 billion by 2020. On renewable electricity, we're on track to deliver our target of at least 30% from renewable sources by 2020. And almost all of that will have happened under a Conservative-led government. That's our record and we're proud of it.
Closed question, Mr. Michael Fabricant.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
There are some very positive things going on in the West Midlands economy, and today's figures show employment in the region up by 140,000 since 2010, and more than 108,000 businesses were created in the region between 2010 and 2014. Thanks to our long-term economic plan for the Midlands engine, we've been able to invest in our public services in the West Midlands, helping to build a strong NHS, reform our education system, and give our police the resources they need.
Michael Fabricant.
Unemployment is down again in my beautiful Lichfield. Yeah. And yesterday was an absolute first for the West Midlands when the whole region cooperated to present 33 investment schemes at an international conference in Cannes, which will create a further 178,000 jobs. So what more can the Prime Minister do to support the Midlands engine, apart from ensuring, of course, that we never get a Labour government?
Well, I'm very glad my honourable friend chose to be here rather than Cannes. I'm very relieved by that. He's right about these 33 schemes. Just last week, we had a £300 million deal signed between Chinese investors and CAD-CAM Automotive that create 1,000 jobs in Coventry. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, was in Staffordshire as Nestlé opening a new coffee factory, bringing 400 jobs. And, of course, we got that historic deal with the West Midlands, which will see significant new powers devolved to the combined authority and the directly elected mayor. We're changing the way our country is run, devolving power, building the strength of our great cities, and Birmingham is the second city of our country.
Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There is widespread reporting, Mr. Speaker, that the UK government is about to commit to send ground troops to Libya to train government forces there. Is this true, and why has Parliament not been informed about it?
Well, of course, if we had any plans to send conventional forces for training in Libya, then of course we'd come to this House and discuss it. What we want to see in Libya is the formation of a unity government. There is progress with Prime Minister Siraj, who can now lead that government of national accord. We'll want to hear from him what assistance and help that we think should be given in Libya. And countries like Britain, like France, like America, like Italy will definitely try and help that new government, because right now Libya is a people smuggling route that is bad for Europe and bad for us, and also you have the growth of Daesh in Libya, which is bad for us and bad for the rest of Europe. But if we have any plans for troop training or troops deployment in a conventional sense, of course we'll come to the House and discuss it.
Sir Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK spent 13 times more bombing Libya than securing the peace after the overthrow of the hated Gaddafi regime. And the critics of UK policy even include President Obama of the United States. So will the Prime Minister give a commitment to bring the issue of any potential Libyan deployment of any British forces to Parliament for approval before giving the green light for that to happen? Will he give that commitment, yes or no?
Very, very happy to give that commitment, as we always do. Look, I think I'm very clear that it was right to take action to prevent that slaughter that Colonel Gaddafi would have carried out against his people in Benghazi. I believe that was right. Of course, Libya is in a state that is very concerning right now, and everyone has to take their responsibilities for that. What I would say is, after the conflict, the British government did support the training of Libyan troops. We did bring the Libyan Prime Minister to the G8 in Northern Ireland. We went to the United Nations and passed resolutions to help that government, but so far we haven't been able to bring about that government of national accord that can bring some semblance of stability and peace to that country. But is it in our interest to help that government do exactly that? Yes, it is, and we should be working with others in order to try and deliver that.
Baron Davis.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Gower, which was won for the first time ever by the Conservatives, could be transformed along with the rest of the region by the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon. Having signed on a £1.2 billion deal yesterday for Cardiff, could the Prime Minister give an absolute assurance that the government review on tidal lagoons will do everything to ensure that the wider Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon project fits the UK energy strategy, and does he further recognise the economic potential this will bring to the Swansea Bay region?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? I do remember visiting his constituency just after his excellent victory last year. I seem to remember we went to a brewery for a mild celebration. He's right that tidal lagoons do have potential. Last month we launched an independent review of tidal lagoon power to better understand the technology. We'll look carefully at the findings of that review and continue working closely with the developers in order to make a decision on Swansea.
Ian C. Lucas.
Wrexham and North Wales is a strong manufacturing and exporting region, but its growth is constrained by lack of access to airports in northwest England. The Office for Rail Regulation is currently considering applications for rail paths from North Wales. Will the Prime Minister support a cross-party campaign for fairness for North Wales and for access to airports in northwest England?
Tell him. No, the former Secretary of State for Wales, the honourable member for Clwyd West, came to see me recently about this, because I think there is a very strong argument for how we can better connect North Wales with the northwest of England and make sure that we build on the economic strength of both. So I'll look very carefully at what he says and what my right honourable friend says about the potential for increasing rail capacity.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Mr.
Last week, a High Court judge ruled in favour of a CPO of the Grade 2-star listed former North Wales Hospital in Denbigh. Years of neglect by its offshore company owner resulted in the buildings being brought to the point of collapse. Thanks to the groundbreaking work carried out by Denbighshire County Council and the Prince's Regeneration Trust, their future should now be safeguarded. But what can the Prime Minister do to prevent buildings such as these, which are deemed national assets, from falling into the hands of those who are not fit and proper guardians, and particularly those outside of the control of our judicial system?
No, my honourable friend makes an important point, and I'm aware of this case. And while heritage is a devolved matter, it is great news that these buildings, which I know how important they are, will be safeguarded. It's my understanding they were brought way back in 1996 by a company and then left completely abandoned. And as he says, that's no way to treat a Grade 2 star listed status building. That's why we have the powers in place for compulsory purchase orders. And I think in this case, Denbighshire Council were absolutely right to use them. Council should have the confidence that they have these measures, and when appropriate, they should be prepared to use them.
Bin Baron.
2 weeks ago, in front of the Education Select Committee, the head of Ofsted, Sir Michael Wiltshire, said that 16 to 19 education should be done in a school-based environment and not in an FE institution. He then went on to say that some pupils head off towards the FE institution, do badly, they get lost and drop out. Does the Prime Minister agree with him?
I think we need a range of settings for A-levels and for post-16 study. I would say this, there are a lot of secondary schools in our country who would like to have a sixth form, and I think there are great benefits for particularly the 11-year-olds going to secondary school who can look to the top of the school and see what girls and boys are achieving, 16, 17, 18, what A-level choices they're making, what futures they're thinking of, and I think for many people it's very inspiring to go to a school with a sixth form. But let's encourage both, let's have the choice, and that's why this academisation of schools is so important, because it gives schools the ability to make these choices for our children.
Richard Graham.
In Apprenticeship Week, I'm sure the Prime Minister will join my thanks to the employers who created 6,500 apprenticeships in Gloucester since 2010, the Gloucester Citizen for its support, and all the apprentices themselves, including my first apprentice, Laura Pearsall, now Gloucester's youngest ever City Councillor. Looking forward, would my right honourable friend do all he can to hasten the introduction of associate nurses who will be higher apprentices and make a huge difference to the NHS and our health sector more broadly?
Well, first of all, he's right to say, I mean, the South West has delivered over 280,000 apprenticeship starts since 2010, so it's absolutely pulling its weight, and well done to his constituents for doing that. I think he's also right about the introduction of associate nurses. We're working with Health Education England to take this on, to offer another route into nursing, which I think can see an expansion of our NHS.
Lee Cowan.
Mr. Speaker, according to the statistics provided by the House Library, there are an estimated 280,000 problem gamblers in the United Kingdom. Can the Prime Minister indicate when the Government will take forward the 2010 report prepared for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport? And does the Prime Minister agree with me that the money from dormant betting accounts should be used to support those whose lives have been destroyed by gambling?
Well, first of all, we will study this report carefully. We did take some action in the last Parliament to deal with problem gambling in terms of the planning system and in terms of the way particularly fixed odds betting terminals worked. I'm very happy to keep examining this issue and to act on the evidence, and I'll be discussing it with the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport.
Ranald J. Wardener.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The systematic killing of Christians and other minority groups by the so-called Islamic State across the Middle East has reached unprecedented proportions. So the action being taken by Her Majesty's government is just. But what more will my right honourable friend do, working with the international community, to halt this genocide being committed against Christians by what I'd rather call the satanic state?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to draw attention to what Daesh is doing in terms of persecuting Christians and others, not least actually others of other faiths and indeed Muslims who they take disagreement with. What we must do is keep to the plan. We can see that we have shrunk the amount of territory Daesh have in Iraq by about 40%. We are seeing also some progress in Syria as well, but this is going to take time, and we must show the patience and the persistence to make sure that we rid the world of this evil death cult.
Callum McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's energy policy is a complete shambles. It is wholly dependent upon the troubled and eye-wateringly expensive new nuclear plant at Hinkley. There is barely a plan A, let alone a plan B. Is the Prime Minister seeking to build the world's most expensive power station or the world's biggest white elephant?
Well, what we're planning is to continue with a successful energy policy which is seeing cheaper energy and lower carbon at the same time. Now, the whole strength of the Hinkley deal is that there is no payment unless this power station goes ahead and is built efficiently by EDF. And I think that will be good for our energy supplies, because if you want to have energy at low cost and low carbon, you need to have strong nuclear energy at the heart of your system.
Kevin Hollinray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Antibiotic Research UK, situated in my constituency, is the world's first charity to tackle antimicrobial resistance, a looming global danger of disaster movie-style proportions. Would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me to see how we can fund their vital research so that this time it's not the Americans that save the world, but the British?
I'm very happy to meet with my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right to raise this issue. Because of the growing resistance to antibiotics and the fact that in so many cases now antibiotics aren't working, we do face a genuine medical emergency around the world. That is why Britain has put this issue squarely on the agenda of the G20, why it was a large part of our discussions with the Chinese when they made the state visit last year, and why we're investing £50 million in an innovation fund working with the Chinese government to take this forward, and I hope that the organisation in his constituency can benefit from some of this research.
Tim Farron.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will know that his Home Secretary is once again trying to deport Afghan interpreters seeking sanctuary in the United Kingdom. These brave people risked their lives serving our armed forces, yet they now face being sent back to the mercy of the Taliban or to join hundreds of thousands of people rotting in refugee camps. Is this how Britain should repay those who put their lives on the line for us? Instead, will he do the right thing and do whatever possible to ensure they are offered safe haven here?
Well, what we did in the last government, in which his party played a role, was that we agreed a set of conditions for Afghan interpreters to be able to come to the UK and be given a sanctuary, but we also provided for a scheme so that those who wanted to stay and help rebuild their country were able to do so. And I would still defend that scheme, even if his party's changed his mind.
Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Deborah Reid, and her sister watched her mother, Joan, waste away in hospital due to inadequate care after a fall, which has been admitted by the consultant in charge. Last week, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, hosted a global summit on patient safety and announced the creation of the new Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch. What more can the government do to ensure patient safety is at the heart of the NHS and prevent such instances occurring in the future?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise cases like this, and obviously they are horrendous when they take place and they should be properly investigated, but as she says, we then need to learn the lessons from them. Now, I think we have made some progress. The proportion of patients being harmed in the NHS has dropped by over a third in the last 2 years, and MRSA bloodstream infections have fallen by over half in the last 5 years. But I think my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is absolutely right to hold this conference and to examine what other industries and practices have done in order to have a 100% zero accident safety culture. We have seen this in other walks of life, and it's time that we applied it to the NHS.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 8 days ago, Oliver Tetlow popped to the shops. He was brutally shot dead. The community are shocked and saddened by this murder of an innocent young man. They have asked for more community local policing and more youth engagement. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and some community champions to discuss how we can make our streets safer?
The Honourable Lady raises a very important point, and I think what we have seen in London is actually a reduction in gun crime. It's a tragic case she refers to, and our hearts go out to the family of the person that she talks about. But we have seen a reduction. We have seen more active policing in our communities, better intelligence policing in terms of dealing with gun crimes, and we must keep that up, and I'll certainly arrange whatever meeting I think is best to make sure that the voices she mentions are listened to.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As my right honourable friend will be aware, Highways England are consulting on a new Lower Thames crossing, with their preferred option being so-called option C, which will divert 14% of traffic away from the existing Dartford crossing. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that before spending billions on a new crossing, we should actually sort out the problem at the existing crossing, not only helping a greater number of motorists, but to improve illegal levels of poor air quality and restore resilience to the M25 motorway network? And will he meet with me to discuss these matters further?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point. As we were discussing earlier, we need to tackle congestion and air quality, and actually stationary traffic is more polluting than moving traffic, and so sorting out the problems at the existing Dartford crossing is important. But I do believe we've also got to look at the options for a new crossing. As I understand it, 2 locations are now on the table as a result of early detailed work, and these are the best available options. Highways England have looked in detail both locations in terms of the economic and community impact, and we look forward to seeing what they recommend, and I hope when they do we can then make progress. This is a vital set of arteries for our country's economy, and we need the traffic to be flowing smoothly.
Chris Leslie.
On reflection, was it wise of the Chancellor to bank on the theory of a £27 billion windfall when it's only gone and vanished in the space of the last 3 months?
Well, I think we'll be hearing quite a lot from the Chancellor in a minute or two, but what I would say is that we have got an economy that is fundamentally strong, facing a very difficult set of world circumstances. But here in Britain, when you look at it, unemployment at 5%, inflation at virtually 0%, the unemployment figures today showing unemployment falling again and wages growing at 2%. That is a better record than most other countries in the developed world can boast, and a lot of that is down to the very clear plan set out by my right honourable friend and followed these last 6 years.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week was English Tourism Week, and I was delighted to welcome an international delegation to the Eden Project to promote Cornwall as a destination for international tourists. Visitor numbers are up in Cornwall, but there is still more we can do to attract overseas visitors out of London and into the regions of our country. Can I ask the Prime Minister what more the government can do to support the tourist industry, and particularly to get more overseas visitors to come to Cornwall?
My honourable friend knows that there is, as far as I'm concerned, nothing finer than getting out of London and getting down to Cornwall, and no better place than Polzeath Beach when the sun is setting and the waves are big, and my phone is working. He's absolutely right. And the Daily Mail photographer's gone home too, that helps. But what we do need to do is get people who come to our country to visit the wonders of London to spend some time outside London, and that is what some of the new schemes we've announced, like for instance the £40 million Discover England Fund, are all about, and I would urge the authorities in Cornwall to make the most of it.
Angela Smith.
Mr. Speaker, in 2014 we exported £12.8 billion worth of food products, with 73% of that total going to other European states. No wonder that 71% of Food and Drink Federation members want us to avoid Brexit. Does the Prime Minister think that our prospects of improving further the export profile of food manufacturing will be strengthened by staying in the European Union?
Well, I think the view from food manufacturers, and indeed from farmers and from the wider business community, 81% of whom yesterday said they wanted to stay in a reformed Europe, I think is very clear. And I think the arguments on food are particularly clear. Our farmers produce some of the cleanest and best food anywhere in the world, and they know they have access to a market of 500 million consumers without tariffs, without quotas, and without any problems. And we shouldn't put that at risk. And when we look at some of the alternatives to being a part of the single market, for instance, a Canadian-style free trade deal, we can see there are restrictions, for instance, quotas on beef, and I don't want to see that applying to British farmers who've got so much to be proud of.
Sir Simon Burns.
Does my right honourable friend agree that having an inspirational mentor can provide young people with the opportunities they would never have benefited from before? Can he tell me how the £14 million that the government will be putting into a new national mentoring scheme will be able to benefit some of the most disadvantaged children in our society.
No, well, I absolutely agree with my right honourable friend. I think one of the most important things that our schools can look to do in the future is to encourage mentors from business, from the public sector, from charities into their schools to give that extra one-on-one help that young people so benefit from. I was at a Harris Academy in Southwark yesterday to see how well that is going, where every child studying GCSEs who wants a mentor can get them, and I think it makes a huge difference to those children's life chances. The £14 million we're putting in should allow an extra 25,000 of the most disadvantaged people in our country have a mentor, and I would urge all schools to look at this. I think there are so many people in business, in the public sector, in charities who would love to take part in this and help young people achieve their potential.
Brian Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister likes to suggest that he's the champion of localism, but today his government is seeking to gag local communities with a crass forced academist policy that stamps out local consultation and dissent. Can he explain to the vast majority of parents and residents in Brighton and Hove who recently roundly rejected academy status for 2 local schools why it is that their views will count for nothing in the future?
I would argue that academy schools are true devolution, because you end up with the parents, with the governors, with the head teacher having full control of the school, able to make decisions about the future of that school. And if that doesn't convince her, then I would say look at the results. If you look at primary sponsored academies, you can see that they have got better records and they're improving faster. If you look at the converter academy schools, 88% of them are rated good or outstanding. This is true devolution, making sure every head teacher is in charge of their school, providing the great education we want for our children.
Finally, Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Jackie Woodcock has been diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. She's shown outstanding courage in her fight against the disease, but unfortunately Jackie did not get the support or the compassion of her employer, who wanted to dismiss her through capability procedures. Now her former partner, Andy Bradley, is trying to get the house they own together repossessed, leaving her homeless whilst dying. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that we require better protection for working people who are diagnosed with a terminal illness? And will he join with me and Jackie in supporting the changes as outlined in the TUC's Dying to Work campaign?
I think the points my honourable friend makes are absolutely right. I will look very carefully at the case that she raises. The truth is, in all of these things, as well as having clear rules, you also need organisations, whether it's employers, whether it's housing associations or landlords, or indeed trade unions, to act with genuine compassion. To act with compassion and to think of the person, the human being, at the other end of the telephone.
Order.
Order. Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I remind honourable members that copies of the budget resolutions will be available to them in the vote office at the end of the Chancellor's speech. I also remind honourable members that it is not the norm to intervene on the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the Leader of the Opposition. I now call the Right Honourable George Osborne, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, today I report on an economy set to grow faster than any other major advanced economy in the world. I report on a labour market delivering the highest employment in our history. And I report on a deficit down by 2/3, falling each year, and I can confirm today on course for a budget surplus. The British economy is stronger because we confronted our country's problems and took the difficult decisions. The British economy is growing because we didn't seek short-term fixes but pursued a long-term economic plan. The British economy is resilient because whatever the challenge, however strong the headwinds, we have held to the course we set out. I must tell the House that we face such a challenge now. Financial markets are turbulent. Productivity growth across the West is too low, and the outlook for the global economy is weak. It makes for a dangerous cocktail of risks, but one that Britain is well prepared to handle if we act now so we don't pay later. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Britain has learnt to its cost what happens when you base your economic policy on the assumption that you have abolished boom and bust. Britain is not immune to slowdowns and shocks, but nor as a nation are we powerless. We have a choice. We can choose to add to the risk and uncertainty, or we can choose to be a force for stability. In this budget, we choose to put stability first. Britain can choose, as others are, short-term fixes and more stimulus, or we can lead the world with long-term solutions to long-term problems. In this budget, we choose the long term. We choose to put the next generation first. We choose, as Conservatives should always choose, sound public finances to deliver security, lower taxes on business and enterprise to create jobs, reform to improve schools, investment to build homes and infrastructure, because we know that's the only way to deliver real opportunity and social mobility. And as Conservatives, we know that the best way we can help working people is to help them to save and let them keep more of the money they earn. Now, that is the path we followed over the past 5 years, and it's given us one of the strongest economies in the world. And that is the path we'll follow in the years ahead. In this budget, we redouble our efforts to make Britain fit for the future. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me turn to the economic forecasts. I want to thank Robert Choate and his team at the Office for Budget Responsibility. To make sure they have available to them the best statistics in the world, I am today accepting all of the recommendations of Sir Charlie Bean's excellent report. And I also want to take this moment to thank another great public servant, Sir Nicholas Macpherson. He has served as Permanent Secretary to the Treasury for 10 years under 3 very different Chancellors, and throughout he has always demonstrated the great British civil service values of integrity and impartiality. He's here today to watch the last of 34 budgets he's worked on, and on behalf of the House and the dedicated officials in the Treasury, I thank him for his service. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the OBR tell us today that in every year of the forecast, our economy grows, and so too does our productivity. But they have revised down growth in the world economy and in world trade. In their words, the outlook is materially weaker. They point to the turbulence in financial markets, slower growth in emerging economies like China, and weak growth across the developed world. Around the globe, they note that monetary policy, instead of normalising this year as expected, has been further loosened. We've seen the Bank of Japan join Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, and the European Central Bank with unprecedented negative interest rates. The OBR also note that this reflects concerns across the West about low productivity growth. The Secretary-General of the OECD said last month that productivity growth has been decelerating in a vast majority of countries. And as a result, the most significant change the OBR have made since their November forecast is their decision to revise down potential UK productivity growth. The OBR had thought that what they describe as the drag from the financial crisis on our productivity would have eased by now, but the latest data shows it has not. The OBR acknowledged today that this revision is, in their own words, a highly uncertain judgment call, but I back them 100%. We saw under the last Labour government what happened when a Chancellor of the Exchequer revised up the trend growth rate, spent money the country didn't have, and left it to the next generation to pick up the bill. I am not going to let that happen on my watch. Now, these days, thanks to the fact we have established independent forecasts, our country is confronted with the truth as economic challenges emerge and can act on them before it's too late. We fix our plans to fit the figures. We don't fix the figures to fit the plans. Now, the IMF have warned us this month that the global economy is at a delicate juncture and faces a growing risk of economic derailment. 8 years ago, Britain was the worst prepared of any of the major economies for the crisis we then faced. Today, Britain is among the best prepared for whatever challenges may lie ahead. And that is what our long-term economic plan has all been about. When I became Chancellor, we borrowed £1 in every 4 we spent. Next year, it will be £1 in every 14 that we spend. Our banks have doubled their capital ratios, we have doubled our foreign exchange reserves, and we have a clear, consistent and accountable monetary policy framework admired around the world. The hard work of fixing our economy is paying off. In 2014, we were the fastest major advanced economy in the world. In 2015, we were ahead of everyone but America. So let me give the OBR's latest forecast for our economic growth in the face of the new assessment of productivity and the slowing global economy. Last year, GDP grew by 2.2%. The OBR now forecasts it will grow by 2% this year, then 2.2% again in 2017, and then 2.1% in each of the 3 years after that. Now, the House will want to know how this compares to other countries. I can confirm that in these turbulent times, the latest international forecast expects Britain to grow faster this year than any other major advanced economy in the world. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the OBR are explicit today that their forecasts are predicated on Britain remaining in the European Union. Over the next, Mr. Deputy Speaker, over the next few months, this country is going to debate the merits of leaving or remaining in the European Union. And I have many colleagues who I respect greatly on both sides of the argument. The OBR correctly stay out of the political debate, and they do not assess the long-term costs and benefits of EU membership. But they do say this, and I quote them directly: a vote to leave in the forthcoming referendum could usher in an extended period of uncertainty regarding the precise terms of the UK's future relationship with the EU. They go on to say this could have negative implications for activity via business and consumer confidence and might result in greater volatility in financial and other asset markets. Citing a number of external reports, the OBR say this: there appears to be a greater consensus that a vote to leave would result in a period of potentially disruptive uncertainty while the precise details of the UK's new relationship with the EU were negotiated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the House knows my view. Britain will be stronger, safer and better off inside a reformed European Union. And I believe we should not put at risk all the hard work the British people have done to make our economy strong again. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Look, let's be honest, we all want to hear what the Chancellor's got to say. Some people may agree, some people may disagree. But I want to hear him, the electorate wants to hear him, this country wants to hear him, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me turn to the OBR forecast for the labour market. Since the autumn statement just 4 months ago, the businesses in our economy have created over 150,000 more jobs than the OBR expected. That's 150,000 extra families with the security of work. That's 150,000 reasons to support our long-term economic plan. This morning, unemployment fell again. Employment reached the highest level ever. And the data confirms that we have the lowest proportion of people claiming out-of-work benefits since November 1974. Now, the OBR are forecasting 1 million more jobs over this Parliament. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we remember what our political opponents said in the last Parliament. They claimed 1 million jobs would be lost. Instead, 2 million were created. And when the jobs started coming, we were told they were going to be low-skilled. But today we know almost 90% of the new jobs are in skilled occupations. We were told the jobs were going to be part-time, but 3/4 are full-time. We were told the jobs will all be in London. But the unemployment rate is falling fastest in the North East. Youth unemployment is falling fastest in the West Midlands. Employment is growing fastest in the North West. And in today's forecast, real wages continue to grow and outstrip inflation in each and every year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the OBR forecasts lower inflation at 0.7% this year and 1.6% next year. I am today confirming in a letter to the Governor of the Bank of England that the remit for the Monetary Policy Committee remains the symmetric CPI inflation target of 2%. I'm also publishing the new remit for the Financial Policy Committee, the body we created to keep an eye on emerging long-term risks in our financial system. I'm asking them to be particularly vigilant in the face of current market turbulence, because in this budget we act now so we don't pay later. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that brings me to our approach to public spending and the OBR forecast for our public finances. In every year since 2010, I have been told by the opposition that now is not the right time to cut government spending. When the economy is growing, I'm told we can afford to spend more. When the economy isn't growing, I'm told we can't afford not to. Today, I'm publishing new analysis that shows that if we hadn't taken the action we did in 2010 and listened instead to our opponents, then cumulative borrowing would have been £930 billion more by the end of the decade than it is now forecast to be. If we'd taken their advice, Britain would not have been one of the best prepared economies for the current global uncertainties. We would have been one of the worst prepared. Now, the very same people are saying to us we should spend more again. I reject that dangerous advice. The security of families and businesses depends on Britain living within its means. Last autumn's spending review delivers a reduction in government consumption that is judged by the OBR to be the most sustained undertaken in the last 100 years of British history, barring the periods of demobilisation after the First and Second World Wars. My spending plans in the last Parliament reduced the share of national income taken by the state from the unsustainable 45% we inherited to 40% today. My spending plans in this Parliament will see it fall to 36.9% by the end of this decade. In other words, the country will be spending no more than the country raises in taxes. And we are achieving this while at the same time increasing resources for our NHS and schools, building new infrastructure, and increasing our security at home and abroad. The OBR now tells us that the world has become more uncertain. So we have two options. We can ignore the latest information and spend more than the country can afford. That's precisely the mistake that was made a decade ago. Or we can live in the world as it is and cut our cloth accordingly. I say we act now so we don't pay later. So I am asking my right honourable friends, the Chief Secretary and the Paymaster General, to undertake a further drive for efficiency and value for money. The aim is to save a further £3.5 billion in the year 2019-20. At less than 0.5% of government spending in 4 years' time, that is more than achievable while maintaining the protections we have set out. At the same time, we will continue to deliver sensible reforms to keep Britain living within its means. On welfare, last week, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, set out changes that will ensure that within the rising disability budget, support is better targeted at those who need it most. Let me confirm that this means the disability budget will still rise by more than £1 billion and will be spending more in real terms supporting disabled people than at any point under the last Labour government. On international aid, I am proud to be part of the government that was the first to honour Britain's commitment to spend 0.7% of national income on development. Now, we won't spend more than that, so the budget will be readjusted, saving £650 million in 2019-20. We're also going to keep public sector pensions sustainable. We reformed them in the last Parliament, which will save over £400 billion in the long term. To ensure those pensions remain sustainable, we've carried out the regular revaluation of the discount rate, and the public sector employer contributions will rise as a result. This will not affect anyone's pension and will be affordable within spending plans that are benefiting from the fiscal windfall of lower inflation. Each of these decisions are a demonstration of our determination that the British economy will stay on course and we will not burden our children and grandchildren. This is a budget for the next generation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me now give the OBR's forecasts for the debt and the deficit. The combination of our action to reduce borrowing this year, along with the revisions to our nominal GDP driven by lower inflation, have produced this paradoxical result. In cash terms, the national debt is lower than it was forecast to be in the autumn, but so too is the nominal size of our economy. We measure the fiscal target against debt to GDP. So while debt as a percentage of GDP is above target and set to be higher in 2015-16 than the year before, compared to the forecast, the actual level of our national debt is in cash £9 billion lower. In the future, debt falls to 82.6% next year, then 81.3% in 2017-18, then 79.9% the year after. In 2019-20, it falls again to 77.2%, then down again the year after to 74.7%. Let me turn to the forecast for the deficit. When I became Chancellor, the deficit we inherited was forecast to reach 11.1% of national income, the highest level in the peacetime history of Britain. Thanks to our sustained action, the deficit is forecast to fall next year to just over a quarter of that at 2.9%. In 2017-18, it falls to 1.9%. Then it falls again to 1% in 2018-19. In cash terms in 2010, British borrowing was a totally unsustainable £150 billion a year. This year we are expected to borrow less than half of that at £72.2 billion. Indeed, our borrowing this year is actually lower than the OBR forecast at the autumn statement. Borrowing continues to fall, but not by as much as before, to £55.5 billion next year, £38.8 billion the year after that, and £21.4 billion in 2018-19. Now, I know there has been concern that the challenging economic times mean we would lose our surplus the following year. And that would have been the case if we had not taken further action today to control spending and make savings. But because we have acted decisively, in 2019-20, Britain is set to have a surplus of £10.4 billion. That surplus is then set to rise to £11 billion the year after. That's 0.5% of GDP in both years. We said we would take the action necessary to give Britain's families economic security. We said our country would not repeat the mistakes of the past and instead live within our means. Today we maintain that commitment to long-term stability in challenging times, decisive action to achieve a £10 billion surplus. We act now so we don't pay later. We put the next generation first. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in every budget I've given, action against tax avoidance and evasion has contributed to the repair of our public finances. And this budget is no different. In the Red Book, we set out in detail the action we will take to shut down disguised remuneration schemes, to ensure the UK tax will be paid on UK property development. We change the treatment of free plays for remote gaming providers. We limit capital gains tax treatment on performance rewards and cap exempt gains in the employee shareholder status. Public sector organisations will have a new duty to ensure that those working for them pay the correct tax, rather than giving a tax advantage to those who choose to contract their work through personal service companies. Loans to participators will be taxed at 32.5% to prevent tax avoidance, and will tighten rules around the use of termination payments. Termination payments over £30,000 are already subject to income tax. From 2018, they will also attract employer national insurance. Taken altogether, the further steps in this budget to stop tax evasion, prevent tax avoidance and tackle imbalances in the system will raise £12 billion for our country over this Parliament. The party opposite talked about social justice but left enormous loopholes in our tax system for the very richest to exploit. While the independent statistics confirm that under this Prime Minister, child poverty is down, pensioner poverty is down, inequality is down, and the gender pay gap has never been smaller. The distributional analysis published today shows that the proportion of welfare and public services going to the poorest has been protected. And I can report that the latest figures confirm the richest 1% paid 28% of all income tax revenue, a higher proportion than in any single year of the last Labour government. Proof that we are all in this together.
Luke, it's strange that we can't hear your own Chancellor of the Exchequer. I want to hear it. I'm sure you must do as well. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can report solid, steady growth, more jobs, lower inflation, an economy on course for a surplus, and all done in a fair way, a Britain prepared for whatever the world throws at us because we've stuck to our long-term economic plan. Mr. Deputy Speaker, credible fiscal policy and effective monetary policy has only ever been part of our plan. A crucial ingredient has always been the lasting structural reforms needed to make our economy fit for the future. And with new risks on the horizon, and with all Western countries looking for ways to increase living standards, now is not the time to go easy on our structural reforms. It's time to redouble our efforts. My budgets last year delivered key improvements to productivity, like the apprenticeship levy, lower corporation tax, and the national living wage. My budget this year sets out these further bold steps we need to take. 1. Fundamental reform of the business tax system. Loopholes closed, reliefs reduced, but so too are rates, and the result, a huge boost for small business and enterprise. 2, a radical devolution of power, so more of the responsibility and the rewards of economic growth are in the hands of local communities. 3, major new commitments to the national infrastructure projects of the future. 4, confronting the obstacles that stand in the way of important improvements to education and our children's future. And 5, backing people who work hard and save. In short, this budget puts the next generation first, and I take each step in turn. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the last Parliament, I cut corporation tax dramatically, but I also introduced the diverted profits tax to catch those trying to shift profits overseas. As a result, Britain went from one of the least competitive business tax regimes to one of the most competitive, and we raised much more money for our public services. Today, the Financial Secretary and I are publishing a roadmap to make Britain's business tax system fit for the future. It will deliver a low-tax regime that will attract the multinational businesses we want to see in Britain, but ensure that they pay taxes here too, something that never happened under a Labour government. And it will level the playing field, which has been tilted against our small firms. The approach we take is guided by the best practice set out by the OECD, work which Britain called for, Britain paid for, and Britain will be among the very first to implement. First, some multinationals deliberately overborrow in the UK to fund activities abroad and then deduct the interest bills against their UK profits. So from April next year, we will restrict interest deductibility for the largest companies at 30% of UK earnings, while making sure firms whose activities justify higher borrowing are protected with a group ratio rule. Next, we're setting new hybrid mismatch rules to stop the complex structures that allow some multinationals to avoid paying any tax anywhere or to deduct the same expenses in more than one country. Then we're going to strengthen our withholding tax on the royalty payments that allow some firms to shift money to tax havens. And lastly, we're going to modernise the way we treat losses. We're going to allow firms to use losses more flexibly in a way that will help over 70,000 mostly British companies. But with these new flexibilities in place, we'll do what other countries do and restrict the maximum amount of profits that can be offset using past losses to 50%. This will only apply to the less than 1% of firms making profits over £5 million. And the existing rules for historic losses in the banking sector will be tightened to 25%. We'll maintain our plans to align tax payment dates for the largest companies more closely to when profits are earned, but we will give firms longer to adjust to these changes, which will now come into effect in April 2019. All of these reforms to corporation tax will help create a modern tax code that better reflects the reality of the global economy. And together they raise £9 billion in extra revenue for the Exchequer. But our policy is not to raise taxes on business. Our policy is to lower taxes on business. So everything we collect from the largest firms who are trying to pay no tax will be used to help millions of firms who pay their fair share of tax. I can confirm today we're going to reduce the rate of corporation tax even further. That's the rate Britain's profit-making companies, large and small, have to pay. And all the evidence shows it's one of the most distortive and unproductive taxes there is. Corporation tax was 28% at the start of the last Parliament, and we reduced it so that it's 20% at the start of this one. Last summer, I set out a plan to cut it to 18% in the coming years. Today, I'm going further. By April 2020, it will fall to 17%. Britain is blazing a trail. Let the rest of the world catch up. Mr. Deputy Speaker, cutting corporation tax is only part of our plan for the future. I also want to address the great unfairness that many small businessmen and women feel when they compete against companies on the internet. Sites like eBay and Amazon have provided an incredible platform for many new small British startups to reach large numbers of customers. But there's been a big rise in overseas suppliers storing goods in Britain and selling them online without paying VAT. That unfairly undercuts British businesses both on the internet and on the high street, and today I can announce we're taking action to stop it. That's the first thing we do to help our small firms. Second, we're going to help the new world of micro-entrepreneurs who sell services online or rent out their homes through the internet. Our tax system should be helping these people, so I'm introducing 2 new tax-free allowances, each worth £1,000 a year, for both trading and property income. There will be no forms to fill in, no tax to pay. It's a tax break for the digital age, and at least 500,000 people will benefit. On top of these 2 measures comes the biggest tax cut for business in this budget. Business rates are the fixed costs that weigh down on many small enterprises. At present, small business rate relief is only permanently available to firms with a rateable value of less than £6,000. In the past, I've been able to double it for 1 year only. Today, I am more than doubling it, and more than doubling it permanently. The new threshold for small business rate relief will raise from £6,000 to a maximum threshold of £15,000, and I'm also going to raise the threshold for the higher rate from £18,000 to £51,000. Let me explain to the House what this means. From April next year, 600,000 small businesses will pay no business rates at all. That's an annual saving for them of up to nearly £6,000 forever. A further 250,000 businesses will see their rates cut. In total, half of all British properties will see their business rates fall or be abolished altogether. And to support all ratepayers, including larger stores who face tough competition and who employ so many people, we will radically simplify the administration of business rates and from 2020 switch the uprating from the higher RPI to the lower CPI. That's a permanent long-term saving for all businesses in Britain. A typical corner shop in Barnstable will pay no business rates. A typical hairdresser in Leeds will pay no business rates. A typical newsagent in Nuneaton will pay no business rates. Mr. Deputy Speaker, This is a budget which gets rid of loopholes for multinationals and gets rid of tax for small businesses, a £7 billion tax cut for our nation of shopkeepers, a tax system that says to the world, we're open for business. This is a Conservative government that is on your side. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just over a year ago, I reformed residential stamp duty. We moved from a distortive slab system to a much simpler slice system. And as a result, 98% of home buyers are paying the same or less, and revenues from the expensive properties have risen. The IMF welcomed the changes and suggests we do the same to commercial property. So that's what we're going to do, and in a way that helps our small firms. Yes. At the moment, a small firm can pay just £1 more for a property and face a tax bill 3 times as large. That makes no sense. So from now on, commercial stamp duty will have a 0 rate band on purchases up to £150,000, a 2% rate on the next £100,000, and a 5% top rate above £250,000. There will also be a new 2% rate for those high-value leases with a net present value above £5 million. This new tax regime comes into effect from midnight tonight. There are transitional rules for purchasers who have exchanged but not completed contracts before midnight. These reforms raise £500 million a year, and while 9% will pay more, over 90% will see their tax bills cut or stay the same. So, for example, if you buy a pub in the Midlands worth, say, £270,000, you would today pay over £8,000 in stamp duty. From tomorrow, you will pay just £3,000 in stamp duty. It's a big tax cut for small firms, all in a budget that backs small business. Mr. Deputy Speaker, businesses also want a simpler tax system. I've asked Angela Knight and John Whiting at the Office of Tax Simplification to look at what more we can do to make the tax system work better for small firms, and I'm funding a dramatic improvement in the service that HMRC offers them. Many retailers have complained bitterly to me about the complexity of the carbon reduction commitment. It's not a commitment, it's a tax. So I can tell the House we're not going to reform it. Instead, I've decided to abolish it altogether. And to make good the lost revenue, the climate change levy will rise from 2019. The most energy-intensive industries like steel remain completely protected, and I'm extending the climate change agreements that help many others. The Energy Secretary and I are announcing £730 million in further auctions to back renewable technologies, and we're now inviting bids to help develop the next generation of small modular reactors. We're also going to help one of the most important and valued industries in our United Kingdom that has been severely affected by global events. The oil and gas sector employs hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland and around our country. In my budget a year ago, I made major reductions to their taxes, but the oil price has continued to fall, so we need to act now for the long term. I am today cutting in half the supplementary charge on oil and gas from 20% to 10%, and I'm effectively abolishing petroleum revenue tax too. Backing this key Scottish industry and supporting jobs right across Britain.
Mr. Ellis! Mr. Shelby, just relax. More to come. Chance with the Exchequer.
Both of these major tax cuts will be backdated, so they're effective from the 1st of January this year. And my honourable friend, the Exchequer Secretary, will work with the industry to give them our full support. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are only able to provide this kind of support to our oil and gas industry because of the broad shoulders of the United Kingdom. None of this support would have been remotely affordable if in just 8 days' time Scotland had broken away from the rest of the UK as the nationalists wanted. Their own audit of Scotland's public finances confirms that they would have struggled from the start with a fiscal crisis under the burden of the highest budget deficit in the Western world. Thankfully, the Scottish people decided that we are better together in one United Kingdom. Mr. Deputy Speaker, believing in our United Kingdom is not the same as believing that every decision should be taken here in Westminster and Whitehall. That's the next step in this budget's plan to make Britain fit for the future. Because as Conservatives, we know that if you want local communities to take responsibility for local growth, they have to be able to reap the rewards. This government is delivering the most radical devolution of power in modern British history. We're devolving power to our nations. The Scottish Secretary and I have agreed the new fiscal framework with the Scottish Government. We're also opening negotiations on a city deal with Edinburgh. We back the new V&A Museum in Dundee. And in response to the powerful case made to me by Ruth Davidson, we're providing new community facilities for local people in Helensburgh and the Royal Navy personnel nearby at Faslane, paid for by our Libya fines. In Wales, we're committed to devolving new powers to the Assembly, and yesterday my right honourable friends, the Welsh Secretary and the Chief Secretary, signed a new £1 billion deal for the Cardiff region. We're opening discussion on a city deal for Swansea and a growth deal for North Wales, so it's better connected to our northern powerhouse. I've listened to the case made by Welsh Conservative colleagues, and I can announce today that from 2018 we're going to halve the price of the tolls on the 7 crossings. My right honourable friend, the Northern Ireland Secretary, and I are working towards the devolution of corporation tax. And I'm also extending enhanced capital allowances to the enterprise zone in Coleraine, and we will use over £4 million from libel fines to help establish the first air ambulance service for Northern Ireland. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this budget we make major further advances in the devolution of power within England too. It was less than 2 years ago that I called for the creation of strong elected mayors to help us build a northern powerhouse. Since then, powerful elected mayors have been agreed for Manchester, Liverpool, Tees Valley, Newcastle and Sheffield. Over half of the population of the northern powerhouse will be able to elect a mayor accountable to them next year. We'll have an elected mayor for the West Midlands too. These new devolution arrangements evolve and grow stronger. Today I can tell the House that my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, and I are transferring new powers over the criminal justice system to Greater Manchester. This is the kind of progressive social policy that this government is proud to pioneer. And I can also announce to the House today that for the first time we've reached agreement to establish new elected mayors in our English counties and southern cities too. I want to thank my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, and my Treasury colleague Jim O'Neill for their superhuman efforts. We've agreed a single powerful East Anglia combined authority headed up by an elected mayor and almost £1 billion of new investment. We've also agreed a new West of England mayoral authority, and they too will see almost £1 billion invested locally. And the authorities of Greater Lincolnshire will have new powers, new funding, and a new mayor. North, south, east, and west, the devolution revolution is taking hold. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I became Chancellor, 80% of local government funding came in largely ring-fenced grants from central government. It was the illusion of local democracy. By the end of this Parliament, 100% of local government resources will come from local government, raised locally, spent locally, invested locally. Our great capital city wants to lead the way. My friend, the Mayor of London, and my honourable friend for Richmond Park passionately argue for the devolution of business rates. I can confirm today that the Greater London Authority will move towards full retention of its business rates from next April, 3 years early. And Michael Heseltine has accepted our invitation to lead a Thames Estuary Growth Commission, and he will report to me with its ideas next year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in every international survey of our country, our failure for a generation to build new housing and new transport has been identified as a major problem. But in this government, we are the builders. And so today, we are setting out measures to speed up our planning system, zone housing development, and prepare the country for the arrival of 5G technology. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be bringing forward our innovation proposals. And because we make savings in day-to-day spending, we can accelerate capital investment and increase it as a share of GDP. All these things that a country focused on its long-term future should be doing. Our new stamp duty rates on additional properties will come into effect next month. I've listened to colleagues, and the rates will apply to larger investors too. We're going to use receipts to support community housing trusts, including £20 million to help young families onto the housing ladder in the southwest of England. This is a brilliant idea by my right honourable friend for Truro and Falmouth and many other colleagues, and it's proof that when the southwest votes blue, their voice is heard loud here in Westminster. And because under this government, we're not prepared to let people be left behind, I'm also announcing a major new package of support worth over £115 million to support those who are homeless and to reduce rough sleeping. Last year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I established a new National Infrastructure Commission to advise us all on the big long-term decisions we need to boost our productivity. And I'm sure everyone in the House will want to thank Andrew Adonis and his fellow commissioners for getting off to such a strong start. They've already produced 3 impressive reports. They recommend much stronger links across northern England. So we're giving the green light to High Speed 3 between Manchester and Leeds. We're finding new money to create a 4-lane M62. And we'll develop the case for a new tunnel road from Manchester to Sheffield. My honourable friends for Carlisle, Penrith and Hexham have told us not to neglect the North Pennines, so we'll upgrade the A66 and the A69 too. I said we would build the Northern Powerhouse. We've put in place the mayors, we're building the roads, we're laying the track, we're making the Northern Powerhouse a reality and rebalancing our country. I'm also accepting the Infrastructure Commission's recommendations on energy and on London transport. The government that is delivering Crossrail 1 will now commission Crossrail 2. I know this commitment to Crossrail 2 will be warmly welcomed by the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Member for Islington. It could have been designed just for him, because it's good for all those who live in North London and are heading south. Mr. Deputy Speaker, across Britain, this budget invests in infrastructure, from a more resilient train line in the southwest to the crossings at Ipswich and Lowestoft in the east that we promised. We are making our country stronger. To respond to the increasing extreme weather events our country is facing, I am today proposing further substantial increases in flood defences. Now that would not be affordable within existing budgets. So I'm going to increase the standard rate of insurance premium tax by just 0.5% and commit all the extra money we raise to flood defence spending. That's a £700 million boost to our resilience and flood defences. The urgent review already underway by my right honourable friends, the Environment Secretary and the Chancellor of the Duchy, will determine how the money is best spent, but we can get started now. I've had many representations from colleagues across the House, including my honourable friends for Morley and Calder Valley, so we're giving the go-ahead to the schemes for York, Leeds, Calder Valley, Carlisle and across Cumbria. In this budget, we invest in our physical infrastructure and we invest in our cultural infrastructure too. I'm supporting specific projects from the Hall for Cornwall in Truro to £13 million for Hull to make a success as City of Culture. Our Cathedral Repairs Fund has been enormously successful, so I'm extending it with an additional £20 million because there's one thing that's pretty clear these days: the Conservative Party is a broad church. And in the 400th anniversary of the great playwright's death, I've heard the sonnets from the Right Honourable Member for Knowsley, and we commit to a new Shakespeare North Theatre there on the site of the first indoor theatre outside of our capital. While my honourable friend for Newark has proposed that we introduce a new tax break for museums that develop exhibitions and take those exhibitions on tour, it's a great idea and we add that to our collection today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we cut taxes for business, we devolve power, we develop our infrastructure. The next part of our plan to make Britain fit for the future is to improve the quality of our children's education. Now, providing great schooling is the single most important thing we can do to help any child from a disadvantaged background succeed. It's also the single most important thing we can do to boost the long-term productivity of our economy, because our nation's productivity is no more, no less than the combined talents and efforts of the people of these islands. And that is why education reform has been so central to our mission since we came to office 5 years ago. Today, we take these further steps. First, I can announce that we're going to complete the task of setting schools free from local education bureaucracy, and we're going to do it in this Parliament. I am today providing extra funding so that by 2020, every primary and secondary school in England will be in the process of becoming an academy. Second, we're going to focus on the performance of schools in the north, where results have not been as strong as we'd like. London's school system has been turned around. We can do the same in the northern powers. And I've asked the outstanding Bradford head teacher, Sir Nick Weller, to provide us with a plan. Third, we are going to look at teaching maths to 18 for all pupils. And fourth, we're going to introduce a fair national funding formula. I am today committing £500 million to speed up its introduction. We will consult, and our objective is to get over 90% of the schools that will benefit onto the new formula by the end of this Parliament. The Conservative government delivering on its promise of fair funding for our schools. Tomorrow, my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, will publish a white paper setting out further improvements we'll make to the quality of education, because we will put the next generation first. Mr. Deputy Speaker, doing the right thing for the next generation is what this government and this budget is about, no matter how difficult and how controversial it is. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you cannot have a long-term plan for the country unless you have a long-term plan for our children's health care. And here are the facts that we know. 5-year-old children are consuming their body weight in sugar every year. Experts predict that within a generation, over half of all boys and 70% of girls could be overweight or obese. Here's another fact that we all know. Obesity drives disease. It increases the risk of cancer, diabetes and heart disease. And it costs our economy £27 billion a year. That's more than half the entire NHS pay bill. And here's another truth we all know. One of the biggest contributors to childhood obesity is sugary drinks. A can of cola typically has 9 teaspoons of sugar in it. Some popular drinks have as many as 13. That can be more than double a child's recommended added sugar intake. Now, let me give credit where credit is due. Many in the soft drinks industry recognise there's a problem and have started to reformulate their products. Robinsons recently removed added sugar from many of their cordials and squashes. Sainsbury's, Tesco and the Co-op have all committed to reduce sugar across their ranges. So industry can act, and with the right incentives, I'm sure it will. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm not prepared to look back at my time here in this Parliament doing this job and say to my children's generation, I'm sorry. We knew there was a problem with sugary drinks. We knew it caused disease, but we ducked the difficult decisions and we did nothing. So today, I can announce that we will introduce a new sugar levy on the soft drinks industry. And let me explain how it will work. It will be levied on the companies. It will be introduced in 2 years' time to give companies plenty of space to change their product mix. It will be assessed on the volume of the sugar-sweetened drinks they produce or import. There will be 2 bands, one for total sugar content above 5 grams per 100 millilitres, a second higher band for the most sugary drinks with more than 8 grams per 100 millilitres. Pure fruit juices and milk-based drinks will be excluded and will ensure the smallest producers are kept out of scope. We will, of course, consult on implementation. We're introducing the levy on the industry, which means they can reduce the sugar content of their products, as many already do. It means they can promote low sugar or no sugar brands, as many already are. They can take these perfectly reasonable steps to help with children's health. Of course, some may choose to pass the price on to consumers, and that will be their decision, and this would have an impact on consumption too. We as Conservatives understand that tax affects behaviour, so let's tax the things we want to reduce, not the things we want to encourage. The OBR estimates that this levy will raise £520 million, and this is tied directly to the second thing we're going to do today to help children's health and well-being. We're going to use the money from this new levy to double the amount of funding we dedicate to sport in every primary school. And for secondary schools, we're going to fund longer school days for those who want to offer their pupils a wider range of activities, including extra sport. It'll be voluntary for schools, compulsory for the pupils. There'll be enough resources for a quarter of secondary schools to take part, but that is just the start. The devolved administrations will receive equivalent funding through the Barnett formula, and I hope they spend it on the next generation too. I'm also using the LIBOR funds specifically to help with children's hospital services. Members across the House have asked for resources for children's care in Manchester, Sheffield, Birmingham and Southampton, and we provide those funds today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a determination to improve the health of our children, a new levy on excessive sugar in soft drinks, the money used to double sport in our schools, a Britain fit for the future, a government not afraid to put the next generation first. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me now turn to indirect taxes. Last autumn, I said that we would use all the VAT we collect from sanitary products to support women's charities, and I want to thank the many members here on all sides in all parties for the impressive proposals they have put forward. Today, we allocate £12 million from the tampon tax to these charities across the UK, from breast cancer care to the White Ribbon campaign and many other causes, and we'll make substantial donations to the Rosa Fund and to Comic Relief so we reach many more grassroots causes. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I now turn to excise duties. When we took office, we inherited plans that would have seen fuel duty rise above inflation every year and cost motorists 18 pence extra a litre. We wholeheartedly rejected those plans, and instead we took action to help working people. We froze fuel duty throughout the last Parliament, a tax cut worth nearly £7 billion a year. In the last 12 months, petrol prices have plummeted. That is why we penciled in an inflation rise. But I know that fuel costs still make up a significant part of household budgets and weigh heavily on small firms. Families paid the cost when oil prices rocketed. They shouldn't be penalised when oil prices fall. We are the party for working people, so I can announce that fuel duty will be frozen for the 6th year in a row. It's a saving of £75 a year to the average driver, £270 a year to the small business with a van. It's the tax boost that keeps Britain on the move. Mr. Deputy Speaker, tobacco duty will continue to rise as set out in previous budgets by 2% above inflation from 6 p.m. tonight, while hand-rolling tobacco will rise by an additional 3%. And to continue our drive to improve public health, we will reform our tobacco regime to introduce an effective floor on the price of cigarettes and consult on increased sanctions for fraud. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've always been clear that I want to support responsible drinkers in our nation's pubs. 5 years ago, we inherited tax plans that would have ruined that industry. Instead, prompted by my honourable friend for Burton and others, the action we took in the last Parliament on beer duty saved hundreds of pubs and thousands of jobs. Today, I back our pubs again. I am freezing beer duty and cider duty too. Scotch whisky accounts for a fifth of all of the UK's food and drinks exports, so we back Scotland and back that vital industry too with a freeze on whisky and other spirits duty this year. All other alcohol duties will rise by inflation as planned. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are some final measures we need to take to boost enterprise, back the next generation and help working people keep more of the money they earn. All of these have been themes of this budget. Let me start with enterprise. Now, we Conservatives know that when it comes to growing the economy, alongside good infrastructure and great education, we need to light the fires of enterprise, and our tax system can do more. To help the self-employed, I'm going to fulfil the manifesto commitment we made, and from 2018, abolish Class 2 national insurance contributions altogether. That's a simpler tax system, a tax cut of over £130 for each of Britain's 3 million strong army of the self-employed. Next, we want to help people to invest in our business and help them to create jobs. The best way to encourage that is to let them keep more of the rewards when that investment is successful. Our capital gains tax is now one of the highest in the developed world when we want our taxes to be among the lowest. lowest. The headline rate of capital gains tax currently stands at 28%. Today, I'm cutting it to 20%. And I'm cutting the capital gains tax paid by basic rate taxpayers from 18% to just 10%. The rates will come into effect in just 3 weeks' time. The old rates will be kept in place for gains on residential property and carried interest. And I'm also introducing a brand new 10% rate on long-term external investment in unlisted companies up to a separate maximum £10 million of lifetime gains. In this budget, we're putting rocket boosters on the backs of enterprise and productive investment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this budget, I also want to help the next generation build up assets and save. The fundamental problem is that far too many young people in their 20s and 30s have no pension and few savings. Ask them and they will tell you why. It's because they find pensions too complicated and inflexible, and most young people face an agonizing choice of either saving to buy a home or saving for their retirement. We can help by providing people with more information about the multiple pensions many have and providing more tax relief on financial advice, and the Economic Secretary and I do both today. We can also help those on the lowest income save, and the Prime Minister announced our Help to Save plan on Monday. Over the past year, we've consulted widely on whether we should make compulsory changes to the pension tax system, but it was clear there was no consensus. Indeed, the former Pensions Minister, the Liberal Democrat Steve Webb, said I was trying to abolish the lump sum. Instead, we're going to keep the lump sum and abolish the Liberal Democrats. I'm tempted to say it'll take effect from midnight tonight, but... Mr. Deputy Speaker, my pension reforms have always been about giving people more...
Order! Mr. Opperman, I know you may have been an amateur jockey, but I don't want you to fall short on this budget. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my pension reforms have always been about giving people more freedom and more choice. So faced with the truth that young people aren't saving enough, I am today providing a different answer to the same problem. We know people like ISAs because they are simple. You save out of taxed income, everything you earn on your savings is tax-free, and it's tax-free when you withdraw it too. From April next year, I'm going to increase the ISA limit from just over £15,000 to £20,000 a year for everyone. And for those under 40, many of whom haven't had such a good deal from the pension system, I'm introducing a completely new, flexible way for the next generation to save. It's called the Lifetime ISA. Young people can put money in, get a government bonus, and use it to either buy their first home or save for their retirement. Here's how it will work. From April 2017, anyone under the age of 40 will be able to open a Lifetime ISA and save up to £4,000 each year. And for every £4 you save, the government will give you £1. So put in £4,000 and the government will give you £1,000 every year until you're 50. You don't have to choose between saving for your first home or saving for your retirement. With the new Lifetime ISA, the government is giving you money to do both. For the basic rate taxpayer, that is the equivalent of tax-free savings into a pension. And unlike a pension, you won't pay tax when you come to take the money out in retirement. For the self-employed, it's the kind of support they simply cannot get from the pension system today. Unlike a pension, you can access your money anytime without the bonus and with a small charge. And we're going to consult with the industry on whether, like the American 401k, you can return the money to the account to reclaim the bonus so it's both generous and completely flexible. Those who have already taken out our enormously popular Help to Buy ISAs will be able to roll it into the new Lifetime ISA and keep the government match. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a £20,000 ISA limit for everyone, a new Lifetime ISA, a budget that puts the next generation first. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I turn now to my final measures. This government was elected to back working people, and the best way to help working people is to let them keep more of the money they earn. When I became Chancellor, the tax-free personal allowance was less than £6,500. In 2 weeks' time, it will rise to £11,000. We committed in our manifesto that it would reach £12,500 by the end of this Parliament, and today we take a major step towards that goal. From April next year, I am raising the tax-free personal allowance to £11,500. That's a tax cut for 31 million people. It means a typical basic rate taxpayer will be paying over £1,000 less income tax than when we came into government 5 years ago. And it means another 1.3 million of the lowest paid taken out of tax altogether. Social justice delivered by Conservative means. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we made another commitment in our manifesto, and that was to increase the threshold at which people pay the higher rate of tax. That threshold stands at £42,385 today. I can tell the House that from April next year, I'm going to increase the high rate threshold to £45,000. That's a tax cut of over £400 a year. It's going to lift over 500,000 people who should never have been paying the higher rate out of that higher rate band altogether. And it's the biggest above-inflation cash increase since Nigel Lawson introduced the 40p rate over 30 years ago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a personal tax-free allowance of £11,500. No one paying the 40p rate under £45,000. We were elected as a government for working people, and we've delivered a budget for working people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, 5 years ago, we set out a long-term plan because we wanted to make sure that Britain never again was powerless in the face of global storms. We said then that we'd do the hard work to take control of our destiny and put our own house in order. 5 years later, our economy is strong, but the storm clouds are gathering again. Our response to this new challenge is clear. We act now so we don't pay later. This is our Conservative budget, one that reaches a surplus so the next generation doesn't have to pay our debts, one that reforms our tax system so the next generation inherits a strong economy, one that takes the imaginative steps so the next generation is better educated, one that takes bold decisions so that our children grow up fit and healthy. This is a budget that gets the investors investing, savers saving, businesses doing business, so that we build for working people a low-tax enterprise Britain, secure at home, strong in the world. I commend to the House a budget that puts the next generation first.
Standing Order number 51. The first motion, entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes, must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? The question is that, pursuant of Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. A. Stamp duty land tax, calculating tax on non-residential and mixed transactions, motion number 5. B. We come to tobacco products duty rates, motion number 62. C. Alcoholic liquor duties rates, motion number 63. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I shall now call upon the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move motion entitled Amendment of the Law, and it is on this motion that the debate will take place today and on succeeding days. The questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will be put at the end of budget debate on Tuesday, the 22nd of March. Will the Chancellor please move the Amendment of the Law motion formally? The question is that it is expedient to amend the law with respect to the national debt and the public revenue, and to make further provision in connection with finance. 2, that the resolution does not accede to the making of any amendment with respect to the value added tax, so as to provide A. Zero rating or exempting a supply, acquisition or importation. B. For the refunding an amount of tax. C. For any relief other than the relief that 1. so far as it is applicable to goods, applies to goods of every description. And 2, so far as it is applicable to services, applies to the services of every description. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The budget the Chancellor has just delivered is actually the culmination of 6 years of his failures. It's a budget.
Look, this corner is not some kind of foreground attraction. We expect the courtesy to both sides who ever speak. I want to hear him, and as I said before, I know that the public in this country wants to hear what the opposition's got to say as well. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's a recovery built on sand on a budget of failure. It's failed on the budget deficit, failed on debt, failed on investment, failed on productivity, failed on trade deficit, failed on the welfare cap, failed to tackle inequality in this country. And today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he's announced growth is revised down last year, this year, every year is forecast. Business investment revised down, government investment revised down. It's a very good thing that the Chancellor is blaming the last government. He was the Chancellor in the last government. This budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has unfairness at its very core, paid for by those who can least afford it. He could not have made his priorities clearer. While 500,000 people with disabilities are losing over £1 billion in personal independence payments, corporation tax is being cut and billions handed out in tax cuts to the very wealthy. The Chancellor has said has to be judged on his record and by the tests he set himself. 6 years ago, he promised a balanced structural current budget by 2015. It is now 2016. There is still no balanced budget. In 2010, he and the Prime Minister claimed we're all in it together. The Chancellor promised his House that the richest would pay more than the poorest, not just in terms of cash, but as a proportion of income as well. So let me tell him how that's turned out. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, independent organisation, found that, and I quote, the poorest have suffered the greatest proportionate losses. The Prime Minister told us recently he was delivering a strong economy and a sound plan. But strong for who? Strong to support who? Sound for who? When 80% of the public spending cuts have fallen on women in our society. This budget could have been a chance to demonstrate a real commitment to fairness and equality. Yet again, the Chancellor has failed. 5 years ago, and it was great words, he promised a Britain carried aloft by the march of the makers, soaring rhetoric. Mr. Deputy Speaker, despite the resilience, ingenuity and hard work of manufacturers, the manufacturing sector is now smaller than it was 8 years ago. Last year, he told the Conservative conference, we are the builders. But ever since then, the construction industry has been stagnating. This is the record of a Conservative Chancellor who's failed to balance the books, failed to balance out the pain, failed to rebalance our economy. It's no wonder that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that his close friend, the honourable member for Chingford and Woodford Green, is complaining. And I quote, we were told for the next 7 years things were looking great. Within 1 month of that forecast, we're now being told things are difficult. The gulf between what the Conservative government expects from the wealthiest and what it demands from ordinary British taxpayers could not be greater. The mates rates deals for big corporations on tax deals is something they will be forever remembered for. This is a Chancellor who's produced a budget for hedge fund managers more than for small businesses. This, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a government...
Mr. Williamson, I don't know what it is that you always want to catch my attention. Can I assure you, you've got my attention. Let's not get it again. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is a government that stood by as the steel industry bled. Skills, output and thousands of very skilled jobs have been lost and communities ruined and damaged by the inaction of the government. The Chancellor set himself a £1 trillion export target. It's going to be missed by a lot more than a country mile. Instead of trade fuelling growth as he promised, it is now holding back growth. He talked of the Northern Powerhouse, and we now discover that 97% of the senior staff of the Northern Powerhouse have indeed been outsourced to London, to the south. And for all his talk of the Northern Powerhouse, the North East accounts for less than 1% of government's infrastructure pipeline projects in construction. For all his rhetoric, there has been systematic underinvestment in the North. Mr. Deputy Speaker, across the country, local authorities, councils are facing massive problems. A 79% cut in their funding. Every library that's been closed, every elderly person left without proper care, every swimming pool with reduced opening hours or closed altogether is a direct result of government underfunding our local authorities and councils. Far from presiding over good quality employment, he is the Chancellor that's presided over underemployment and insecurity,
There's certain people that's testing my patience, so just think what your constituents are thinking out there as well. I want to hear the Leader of Opposition. I expect you to hear the Leader of Opposition. If you don't want to, I'm sure the tea room awaits. Maybe there's a phone call for Mr. Hoare if you keep shouting. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Security comes from knowing where your income is and knowing where your job is. If you're one of those nearly million people on a 0 hours contract, you don't know what your income is. You don't have that security. We have the highest levels, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of in-work poverty on record. The largest number without security. They need regular wages that can end poverty and can bring about real security in their lives. Logically, Mr. Deputy Speaker, low-paid jobs don't bring in the tax revenues that the Chancellor tells us he needs to balance his books. Household borrowing is once again being relied upon to drive growth. Risky, unsecured lending is growing at its fastest rate for the last 8 years and is clearly not sustainable. The renewables industry is vital to the future of our economy, our planet, indeed our whole existence. It's been targeted for cuts. Thousands of jobs lost in the solar panel production industry, and the Prime Minister, as we discussed earlier at Prime Minister's question time, promised the greenest government ever. Here again, an abject failure. Science spending also down $1 billion compared to 2010. Home ownership down under this Conservative government, a whole generation locked out of any prospect of owning their own home. And this is the Chancellor who believes that a starter home costing £450,000 is affordable. It might be for some of his friends, it might be for some members opposite. It isn't for those people who are trying to save for a deposit because they can't get any other kind of house. We heard promises, Mr. Deputy Speaker, before. 2 years ago, the Chancellor pledged a garden city of 15,000 homes in Ebbsfleet, and many cheered that. His ministers have been very busy ever since then. They've made 30 Ebbsfleet announcements, and they've managed to build 368 homes in Ebbsfleet. It's 12 homes for every press release. We need obviously, a vast increase in press releases in order to get any homes built in Ebbsfleet or indeed anywhere else. And whilst we welcome the money that's going to be put forward to tackle homelessness, it is the product of underinvestment, underfunding of local authorities, not building enough council housing, not regulating the private rented sector that has led to this crisis. We need to tackle the issue of homelessness by saying that everybody in our society deserves a safe roof over their head. Mr. Speaker, child poverty is forecast to rise every year in this Parliament. What a damning indictment of this government. And what a contrast to the last Labour government that managed to lift almost 1 million children out of poverty. 81% of the tax increases and benefit cuts are falling on women, and the 19% gender pay gap persists. Despite the protestations of the Chancellor, it is a serious indictment that women are generally paid less than men for doing broadly similar work. It will require a Labour government to address this. And the government's own Social Mobility Commissioner said, and I quote, "There is a growing sense that Britain's best days are behind us rather than ahead of us, as the next generation expects to be worse off than the last." The Chancellor might have said a great deal about young people. He failed to say anything about the debt levels that so many former students have, the high rents that young people have to pay, the lower levels of wages that young people get, the sense of injustice and insecurity that so many young people in this country face and feel every day. It will again require a Labour government to harness the enthusiasm and talent and energy of the young people of this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, investing in public services is vital to people's well-being. I think we're all agreed on that, at least I hope we are. Yet, every time the Chancellor fails, he cuts services, cuts jobs, sells assets, further privatises. That was very clear when we were looking at the effects of the floods last year. Flood defences were cut by 27%. People's homes in Yorkshire, Lancashire, Cumbria ruined because of his government's neglect of river basin management and the flood defences that are so necessary. Obviously, we welcome any money that is now going into flood defences. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I hope that money will also be accompanied by reversing the cuts in the fire service, which makes it so difficult for our brilliant firefighters to protect people in their homes. Reverse the cuts in the Environment Agency, which makes it so hard for those brilliant engineers to protect our towns and cities, and for local government workers who performed so brilliantly during the crisis of December and January in the areas that were flooded. Our education service, Mr. Deputy Speaker, invests in people. It's a vital motor for the wealth of this country in the future. So I ask, why have we seen a 35% drop in the adult skills budget by this government? People surely need the opportunity to learn, not have to go into debt in order to develop skills from which we as a community entirely benefit. The Chancellor announced yesterday, and there is not one shred of evidence to suggest that turning schools into academies boosts performance. There's nothing in the budget that deals with the real issue, which is teacher shortage, school place crisis or ballooning class sizes. He spoke at some length on the issue of ill health amongst young children and the way in which sugar is consumed at such grotesque levels within our society. And I agree with him about that. I welcome what he said. I'm sure he will join with me in welcoming the work done by many members of this House, including my friend the member for Leicester East and his work, and Jamie Oliver in his work, in helping to deal with the dreadful situation of children's health. If we as a society cannot protect our children from high levels of sugar and all that goes with it, with the later crisis of health, cancer and diabetes, then as a House we failed the nation. I support his proposals on sugar, as I hope all members of this House will. But there is an issue that faces the National Health Service. The deficit has widened to its highest level ever on record. Waiting times are up. The NHS is in a critical condition. Hospital after hospital faces serious financial problems and is working out what to sell in order to balance its books. Our NHS should have the resources to concentrate on the health needs of the people, not having to get rid of resources in order to survive. The Public Accounts Committee reported only yesterday that National Health Service finances have deteriorated at a severe and rapid pace. I didn't detect much in this budget that's going to do much to resolve that crisis. He's also cut public health budgets, mental health budgets and adult social care. Earlier this month, the government forced through a £30 per week cut to disabled ESA claimants.
Order. Just one second. I'm summoned here because of the front bench conversations. If you need that conversation, I'm sure there's plenty of room in the tea room for you. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Last week we learned that 500,000 people will lose up to £150 per week due to cuts in personal independence payments. I simply ask the Chancellor this: if he can finance the giveaways that he's put in his budget to different sectors, why can't he fund the need for dignity for the disabled people of this country? Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor said in the autumn statement that he had protected police budgets. Sir Andrew Dilnot confirms there has been a decrease in the police grant and 18,000 police officers have lost their jobs, fewer police on the streets, and as my friend the member for Brent South pointed out in her question to the Prime Minister, to cut down on dangerous crime against vulnerable individuals, we need community policing and we need community police officers. 18,000 losing their jobs doesn't help. This is a government with failure on the police, failure on the National Health Service, failure on social care, housing and education. Public investment lays the foundations for future growth. The OECD recognises that, the IMF, the G20. The CBI and the TUC are crying out for more infrastructure investment. It's Labour who will invest in the future in a high-technology, high-skill, high-wage economy. The investment commitments the Chancellor made today, yes, of course they're welcome, but they're belated and they're nowhere near the scale this country needs. People rightly fear that this is just another press release on the road to non-delivery of crucial projects. Chronic underinvestment presided over by this Chancellor, both private and public, means that the productivity gap between Britain and the rest of the G7 is the widest it's been for a generation. Without productivity growth, revised down further today, we cannot hope to improve living standards. Our party, the Labour Party, backs a strategic state that understands businesses, public services, innovators and workers combine together to create wealth and drive sustainable growth. The Chancellor adopted a counterproductive fiscal rule. The Treasury Select Committee's response that it was, and I quote, not convinced that the surplus rule is credible. they're right. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor is locking Britain into an even deeper cycle of low investment, low productivity and low ambition. We'll be making the case for Britain to remain as a positive case within the European Union and all the solidarity that can bring. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, over the past 6 years, the Chancellor has set targets on deficit, on debt, on productivity, on manufacturing and construction, on exports. He's failed in all of them and is failing this country. There are huge opportunities for this country to build on the talent and efforts of everyone. But the Chancellor is more concerned about protecting vested interests. The price of failure is being borne by some of the most vulnerable within our society. The disabled being robbed of up to £150 a week. These aren't the actions of a responsible statesperson, they are the actions of a cruel and callous government that sides with the wrong people and punishes the most vulnerable and poorest within our society. He was defeated when he tried to make tax credit cuts next month by this House opposing it and by Labour members and crossbenchers in the Lords. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the continuation of austerity that he's confirmed today, particularly in the area of local government spending, is a political choice, not an economic necessity. It locks us into a continued cycle of economic failure and personal misery. This party, Mr Deputy Speaker, will not stand by while more poverty and inequality blight this country. We will oppose these damaging choices and make the case for an economy in which prosperity is shared by all. Let us harness the optimism, the enthusiasm, the hope, the energy of young people, not burden them with debts and unaffordable housing, low-wage jobs and zero-hours contracts, but instead act in an intergenerational way to give young people the opportunities and the chances they want to build a better, freer, more equal, more content Britain than this Chancellor of the Exchequer has proved he is utterly incapable of doing with his budget today.
Andrew Tyler. I'll take a moment or two to allow people to leave the chamber, if I may, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has made the most difficult speech of the parliamentary year. He's responding to a budget that he hasn't seen. I haven't seen it either, as a matter of fact. I'd be interested to know if he feels it was the speech of a democratic socialist. I think it was. It was certainly spoken with great sincerity. But I wonder whether he can nod and tell me if he agrees or disagrees, whether, as John Smith and Tony Blair did, he now accepts that a capitalist economy, properly regulated, is the most powerful source of prosperity and growth yet invented. I'd just be...
Feel free to nod.
No,
at this point...
I'm not going to put him under any pressure, but I think that...
We'll put him under pressure.
That is the...
He nodded. He nodded. For the record, that's a nod.
I think the Chancellor...
For the record, that's a shake.
The Chancellor deserves a very great deal of credit for this recovery, and I've said so before. So does the Prime Minister, who's just slipped out, who's backed the Chancellor, I think, for the most part. And the last 6 years have been extremely difficult, very difficult indeed at times, and it's a defining achievement that the government has led the country out of the worst crisis in modern history and is now stabilising those public finances which looked completely, indeed were completely out of control in 2010. And we just shouldn't forget the scale of the challenge that beset the government at that time, the then coalition government. The Chancellor's talked about storm clouds gathering. I think he called it a cocktail of risks coming particularly from abroad. He's certainly right about that. We've got emerging markets slowing down, capital markets faltering, and we've got the Eurozone edging back towards a serious
crisis, and if all of that is sustained, the UK economy is going to take a hit. And of course, as the OBR has pointed out, the uncertainty in the short term about the EU referendum won't help either. And we've seen all that reflected in the OBR's forecasts, particularly on productivity. So the Chancellor is right to be extremely cautious.